Alright, hello Astro subscribers and welcome back to another video outlining some of the more detailed parts of astrology and alchemy seen from both the Vedic and the Western Hermetic tradition. This is a channel where we talk about the more complex, the more mathematical forms of astrology and alchemy and bring it to you in a way that hopefully you can understand, cut through the complicated mathematics, and get to the point where you can use this in your day-to-day life to make it better. Now, astrology is a very complex, multi-layered thing, and despite what some people would have you believe, and it's got a lot of moving parts. And today we're going to be looking at one of these moving parts. Now, the prerequisites for this lesson are going to be you have to understand the nakshatra system that I've gone through in a previous video series on this channel. You're going to have to understand the layer system, which I've also gone through on a previous series of this channel. And you're going to have a basic understanding of just core concepts like elements, signs, houses, modalities, which planets rule which signs, that kind of thing. So yeah, basically this is a sort of tool where you're gonna need a lot of prior knowledge. So if you don't understand those concepts, you can obviously still watch this video, but you might not understand everything that's being said, and I'm not gonna necessarily go back over it because it's already here on my channel in other ways. So today we're gonna be talking about the Dasa system. And the Dasa system is a really, really interesting, really, really useful tool that basically allows you to look at somebody's life like a chapter book. And it's based on the position of the moon and where the moon starts out in a person's chart. What nakshatra the moon is in is going to show you the dasha that they're in. But first, before I get into any of this, what even is a dasha? Well, like I said, a dasha is a chapter in a person's life. There are 9 dashas in total, and while of course not everybody's going to go through all 9 of the dashas in their life, because the sum total of it is 120 years, it's very helpful to, when you're doing an analysis, look at what chapter of somebody's life they're in. And this allows you to prioritize certain planets over other planets. So for instance, if somebody's in Saturn Dasha, then you're not going to start their chart or reading their chart by looking at their sun sign or their moon sign, because they're in Saturn Dasha. And they're going to be focused on the concepts of work and independence and money and these kinds of things. Now, these are not the only chapter-like things in a person's life, but it's very important to know how dashas work and what the different dashas mean, what the different focuses are, what people are going to be drawing towards them in different dashas in order to do any complex astrology reading. So the dashas have the same pattern as the 9 nakshatra system. So if you remember, the nakshatra is a 27-fold system based on 13 1/3 lunar days. So the amount of time it takes the moon to move in one solar day. So there's 27 of these, and they repeat on a cycle that's one change every day. And if you remember, the nakshatra system goes Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars. I have my notes up there. Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, and then goes back to Ketu. So that's, again, Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury. That's one of those systems that you're going to have to remember. It's like just like the hour system. It's just like the signs of the zodiac, which elements, which planets correspond. It's just a table of things you have to memorize if you want to understand this stuff well. And once you understand it, it makes sense. And if you haven't committed it to memory, then you're going to have it written down or something. So yeah, that's the nakshatra system that repeats 3 times, and each of those 9 things or parts of 13 and 1/3 makes a 120-degree third of the zodiac wheel. So it goes from element to element. So from the beginning of Aries, which starts in Ketu, to the end of Cancer, which starts in the Mercury, or which ends in the Mercury nakshatra. That's one elemental cycle from fire to water, beginning of fire to the end of water, and then that represents a cycle of creation and destruction of the self. And then you go to the higher self, which starts with Leo and ends with Scorpio, where the ego dissolves. And then you enter the higher intellectual self, which starts with Sagittarius, which is the beginning of structured wisdom, and ends with Pisces, which is the universe itself and dissolving into being open to new information from the universe, as opposed to just from your narrow tradition, which is represented by Sagittarius. Okay, so that was a lot, but I've already been through that in previous videos, so you can go back and look at those if you need to refresh your memory. Now, what we're going to be doing now is looking at the moon. So what nakshatra is the moon in? So let's say that your moon is in the beginning of Aries. Let's say it's at 3 degrees Aries, your moon, just for argument's sake. Now, what you're going to do is, that you're going to start your life in the Ketu Dasha, because your moon is in the Ketu Nakshatra, and the nakshatra is 13 1/3 degrees. You're 3 degrees in, so that means you're roughly 25% of the way through the Dasha. You're like maybe 22% of the way through the Dasha. Now, you're going to look at the length of the Dasha, the Ketu Dasha. I have it written down up there. I don't have these things committed 100% in memory. The Ketu Dasha is 7 years. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, well, what's a quarter of 7 years? And I'm just spitballing here. It's like, what would it be? A quarter of 6 is 1.5, so a quarter of 7. Let's just say it's 1 3/4 years. So you're 1 3/4 years into the 7-year Ketu Dasha, and that means that you have 5 1/4 years left, if I'm not mistaken. I hope that's enough to get the general message across, but I'm going to do one more example so you guys can understand. Okay, let's say that your moon is in, let's just say Cancer, and it's at, let's say it's at 10 degrees Cancer, right? So that's halfway through the Saturn Nakshatra, which starts at 3 1/3 degrees Cancer and goes to 16 2/3 degrees Cancer. So that's the Saturn Nakshatra. And again, I've covered that in another video. That's the Nakshatra of Pushya. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at, okay, well, you're halfway through that Saturn Dasha in your life when you start your life. The Saturn Dasha is 19 years. So let's say that you're 8.5 years into the Saturn Dasha when you're born. And so when you're 8.5, your Dasha is going to shift, and it's going to go to the Mercury Dasha. And that's going to go for 20 years, and then you're going to be in Ketu Dasha because, again, the pattern is the same as the nakshatras. Okay, so I know this is confusing. It took me a long time to understand this, and it's probably going to take you a long time to understand it too. But, the nice thing about a YouTube video is you can pause it, you can go back and forth, and you can look at it and watch it again and again until it sinks in, until it clicks in your mind. This is a very beautiful pattern. It seems chaotic. It seems like there's a lot of math, and there is a lot of math. But when you fully understand it, not only will your astrology be 10 times more powerful, 10 times more, just 10 times better at predicting people's lives, but it will also, you will appreciate the mathematics of the universe much, much more because you can see the perfection in the details of what goes into the human soul. So, so there's that. Now, I want to do a little bit of in-depth analysis into each of the dashas, and I want to talk about which, like what types of things you're going to generally expect. And again, I have to put this PS on it. Just like with the sun signs, I'm not talking about any individual person. There's far too many details in any individual chart to really cover everybody's experience in a 10-minute long video or 15-minute long video. What I can do is give you general themes, and then you can add to it from your own experience. So for K2 Dasha, that's the 10th layer, if you remember the layer system videos that I've done. The 10th layer is related to detachment. It's related to spiritual isolation. It's related to removal from the material world, sort of abstract concepts and sort of nothingness. It's the detachment from systems and hierarchies. And that's K2. So in the K2 Dasha, what happens? Most people, they encounter a loss. They encounter a difficult time period, a period of depression, a period where they might be homeless, that kind of thing. They might be forced to work a job that will not be super fulfilling because they'll have to survive, that kind of thing. And the way K2 works, its magic on people, is it puts them in situations where they have to detach, where they have to zone out. K2 is also associated with unconsciousness, with blindness, with sort of things that make you able to understand the nature of the world beyond your senses. It's associated with sleep. So I'm not saying that everybody in their K2 Dasha goes blind or obviously ends up in a coma or something. That would be ridiculous. But what tends to happen is it makes you, it removes you from things, from your attachments in a way that is jarring, is shocking, and it can shock you out of your connections to the world. And that can be very destructive on the surface, even though ultimately it usually ends up healing a person spiritually at the end of all that, if they let it and understand why it's happening. So the next one is going to be Venus Nakshatra or Venus Dasha. During the Venus Dasha, people will encounter a lot of luxury. They will encounter relationships. They will encounter a lot of material things. This is generally considered a very good or pleasant Dasha. It will also stress your relationship with materialism, depending on if you have a lot of Venus in Libra or like Libra placements or Taurus placements. You can encounter, you can get married during this time period. It's possible. Again, it's going to the quality of it. It's going to depend on your Venus placement in your chart. Like if you have Venus in Capricorn in the 10th house, you're probably going to be more work oriented during this time. But nonetheless, the themes of relationships and material luxuries will show up during this time period for people, and they will be focused and fixated on it. Sun, that's the 13th layer, so you're going to be dealing with creativity, you're going to be dealing with artistic self-expression, you're going to be dealing with personal gain. I think things that often happen during this, I've seen a lot of people get new cars during this time period or get a lot of energy put into their system, and often it can be too much to handle. So what can happen is when somebody goes from Venus to Sun Nakshatra, they can, or Dasha rather, Venus to Sun Dasha, they can get a thing paying off in their life where they get to be this star, this celebrity for a short period of time, and then it kind of burns out and leads them into the Moon Dasha. The Moon Dasha is a place of personal commitment to oneself and one's responsibilities to one's family, that kind of thing. Moon is related to survival. It's related to fixation. It's the 12th layer. It's very focused, and it's very emotional. People might have to deal with a lot of emotional duress during this time period as well. You have, and then from there you have Mars Dasha, which is obviously what you would expect. You deal with conflict. You deal with standing up for yourself, pushing for your goals, pushing for your desires, that sort of masculine energy that tries to interact with the Venus energy of the 5th layer. And then you have Rahu Dasha. Rahu Dasha is widely considered one of the most negative time periods in a person's life. A lot of desires come into a person's life, but they feel a little bit impotent. They feel like they can't quite grab what they want. People can become very superficial, very confused, very neurotic during this time period because Rahu is the fourth layer. It's related to that survival instinct, but it's also related to things related to your survival instinct that you wouldn't necessarily expect, things like social status but it's also related to idiosyncrasy and confusion because of its link to Aquarius through Uranus. So it's it's a very disrupted time period in a person's life where they have a lot of wants, they have a lot of desires, they're stuck between conformity and nonconformity. They want a lot of things and they don't really feel like they have the ability to get it. And that can be very challenging for people. So then you have Jupiter Nakshatra, and during Jupiter Nakshatra, people are going to be focused on being their best intellectual selves. They're going to be focused on teaching. Sometimes people focus on traveling if this happens when they're young. If it happens when they're older, then that's also good. You can meet teachers during this time who teach you about spirituality and religion. So this can be a good time to figure out your worldview. It's generally considered better if this nakshatra happens when you're young, because then you get a very stable grasp on what you believe very young, and that can be a good thing. And then you have Saturn nakshatra, which in comparison to Jupiter nakshatra, Saturn nakshatra is going to force you to take responsibility. So people in their Jupiter nakshatra get a little bit lackadaisical, they'll get a little bit meta, a little bit abstract. And what Saturn does is it forces them to come back to reality and ground their ideas. They put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, practice what they preach. So it requires them to do that. So that was just an example of things that can happen in each individual dasha. Obviously, as with anything in astrology, it's down to the individual level. I can just share with you generalized themes to get you into this stuff, but that doesn't mean that everything I say is going to apply to everybody. Some people might enter Ketu dasha and they get a giant raise, they get a bunch of free money. It depends on where these things are placed. Some people might enter Sun dasha and be really depressed if their sun's in Scorpio or Pisces or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that what I said is going to come true. These are just generalized themes. But basically the best way to view the dashas is you're seeing the world through that layer, through the layer of the planet of that dasha. So again, for Venus, that's the 5th layer. For Sun, that's the 13th, etc., etc. You can go back, check out my video on the layer system if you really want a good understanding of what's going on there. And it just starts with the nakshatra of your moon, and however far your moon is through that nakshatra, that's how far into the dasha you start. And I recommend you all try to work with this system if you feel ready, and hone your predictions and your understanding around the dasha system. So if you're looking at somebody's chart and you understand this, look at their moon. See, okay, well, what dasha are they likely to be in or near? What are they going to be focused on right now? So you can see what a person is doing in their life at the moment by analyzing the dasha, and that's the planet they're seeing the world through at this current time. So that was my analysis of the dasha system. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave it below, and I will talk to you guys later and next time. Thank you.